There are two arenas, broadly speaking, where experience can be gleaned, where our awareness view can be placed to perceive the simulation of this creational realm, that being the physical level and the real side. Although everything is awareness, and everybody is this everything awareness, and this everything isness awareness, absent of the vehicles of creation, would be a view of everything that this isness is. So what would limit our everything isness view position would be to place the awareness in a vehicle, a created idea, an idea that then effects a simulated, encapsulated situation that then isn't this everything isness position. For this isness must be recognized, or should we stand in this real awareness position, which is this isness, our real state of being, the real awareness nowness being the only position where we can perceive the is from, standing in this real awareness position, absent of the recognition of the is, it is a part of. We would rather be in a kind of a nothingy state, like a drop of water, unable to recognize the ocean it is a part of. Our real awareness would just be there, and although rather a delightful state to perhaps be such, absent of the burdens of the consciousness, mind, and emotions, the is overall is about the continued recognition of the isness that it is, and this is made so by the unconscious souls first going through the creational process, recognizing the real awareness that they are, then recognizing the is from the comparisons that everything creational provides. The drop of water recognizes itself as a unique drop amidst the ocean of the is, and as each drop does so, unique beings of light become so, that recognize the is ocean in relation to the drop of the ocean that they are, a drop that still is a part of the is, but as this becomes so with each being of established light, so then, as every real awareness being is a part of the is, so their recognition of the is translates as the is overall achieving greater recognition of itself, a kind of a pyramid scheme of recognition that feeds ultimately the isness. And so a creation as the comparative tool for this recognition of first our real awareness, the establishing of the nowness real awareness position, then from there the recognizing of the is. Creation is overall comprised of ideas, each of which can be construed as vehicles, encasements, that effect whatever the nature of the idea might be. For if we were just to sit in the real awareness nowness state in creation, in our body types, we are no closer to recognizing the is than if we had just remained with the ears as little aspects or drops of its ocean. We rather need to build up our world of literal illusions. We have the simulation of the physical worlds that our body forms operate in, but until we establish a personal self, that we do as we begin utilizing the literal mind and move ourselves from this nowness, real awareness position, we won't be able to move our view from the consciousness we have created to the real awareness nowness position that affords us our comparison overall. Through the animal forms, the consciousness is developed, but the real awareness nowness position is retained, and the real awareness just views the simulated physical experience, like the operator sat in front of a computer game. But we tend to immerse ourselves in the game, to embrace it, and consider it to be real and that which we are, even though it is just our vehicle for experience. And to move into the consciousness, into the illusion, to remove ourselves from the nowness, real awareness state, we need activate the faculties of the personal self-created vehicles. For as we do, as we apply thought and consideration, we are creating encapsulated ideas that then can't be this everything, real awareness, isness position. And we might well create the ideas, then move back to the real awareness position, a back and forth, that effectively is affording a comparison. But generally, as the literal mind begins to be utilized, so this becomes a favored activity, and eventually we remain with the illusions, the creations and ideas we generate through the body vehicles, rather than to return to the nowness of our real awareness state. And as this is a necessary thing, as we become immersed fully in the consciousness, we create and withdraw connection from the real awareness, as we then create effectively a second self, the personal self-awareness that goes unconscious, that thinks it and that which it creates is what it is, as this is necessary for our eventual recognizing of the ears from all the comparison that the consciousness construction and what it effects provides. So must there be some instinctual or real awareness motivated drive for this disconnect, this creation of an additional personal self-awareness to be so. And we can see then that despite the seeming complexity of the consciousness, all its references of lifetimes, its construction of ideas, and the immensity of the simulation that effects from a consciousness overall, the real awareness position is but a subtle shift away, a stepping aside from the consciousness that the nowness of the real awareness can be stood in. But of course, with all the emotional attachment to the various ideas that make up the consciousness, the bulk of which will be in the subconscious that we are then unconscious of from our current lifetime of personal self, memory, body perspectives, we can move into the real awareness nowness. But until all these ideas of the consciousness are fully unveiled and then decided as to their release, we cannot be extricated from the simulators, as any idea we cling to is a decision to continually experience this idea, and encapsulated ideas to effect simulation can only be experienced within creational simulators, aside from the isness real universes. So this is a major part of the process, that we go about the revealing of everything the consciousness comprises of, and then decide to release it all, that we are then not cause to effect bound to a creation. And so, as I said, everything creational, every idea, is a vehicle from the individual ideas to the consciousness that is comprised of these ideas. We construct our vehicles, our ideas, they effect the simulation, and our awareness is placed in the mechanics that we experience then the results of what we have decided. Every simulated view we might have then, if it isn't this real awareness, everything position, then it is a vehicle, an idea, that the awareness is placed within. In reality, we are this one real awareness everything, and as the real awareness is through all created ideas, all created vehicles, so can views be afforded from any vehicle perspective, regardless of the personal self's contention of individuality, and that the created vehicle belongs to that personal self. That yes, the real awareness, as it recognizes the is, becomes a unique being then, but ultimately still a part of the isness, as everything must be, and so an isness, an overall awareness, that is through all the created, individualized consciousness units in creation. And so, broadly, our personal awareness view would be either through the consciousness decoding apparatus of the physical body that presents the physical level simulation, like putting on a virtual reality headset, or as we move our awareness from the physical body, as we remove the headset of a consciousness virtual reality, we are at liberty to explore everything dimensional that stems from the personal self and all the aspects of it, from the astral to the ethereal, including anything created by others through their body vehicles, the life levels overall, or individual thought forms, and imagined imagery. Thought and imagination are just as real in simulated terms as life levels, as everything creational is based on the ideas of the body vehicles after all, and perpetuated life levels, or creational areas, are just perpetuated idea agreements, and we can also experience the creations of the real guides, as they utilize the mechanics of creation to provide simulated experiences to assist us with our awareness processes. But often I dwell in what I have described as a between state, where the personal awareness is not locked into the consciousness and the physical level simulation, or aside from it, and on the real side with all the creational potentiality aside from the consciousness, but rather a position bridging the two. And as you might imagine from such a position, if we bridge two vehicle positions for our personal awareness view, the physical and the real side, naturally then, what we must perceive and experience will be a combination of the two. Generally then, I will have the physical level as the overall scene, my bedroom as is usually the case, which will be present even should my eyes be shut, because from this between state I rather am deciding to retain my consciousness position on the physical, just as a ghost might when the individual has died but hasn't moved on fully. It clings to the physical, and so, from the ghost's perspective, it hasn't left its physical position, and with all the hauntings, disruptions that can come from that, with a poltergeist, etc., and with my physical level bedroom as the overall scene, with my awareness bridging onto the real side, so can features and elements of the real side bleed over onto the physical into my room. Such features would be invisible were I fully immersed in the physical vehicle mechanics, but still there in actuality, as everything is here and now, in this moment, everything of creation, from one dimensional end to the other. It's just where our personal awareness is placed, which idea vehicle, as to what of the everything of creation we experience and perceive. On this occasion, a curious feature would indeed manifest and bleed over, and automatically, with a real awareness, we have a tendency to lean toward, and with the discernment of everything in our experience it can provide, as the real awareness is the overall awareness through everything created, and so can determine the particulars of every idea, the intent that lies behind them, etc. So was I afforded real awareness impressions that this bleed over was malign, an effect of an ill intent. It looked like a kind of sliver of organic material, as though a slice cut from a cube, squared in shape then and flattened. Nothing can feature in our experience without our decision that it is there, for as is the nature of the simulation, we install the ideas into our consciousness. We experience the effects of the ideas of our choosing, and many times we may be marketed into agreeing to certain ideas that on the surface seem beneficial, but that represent control. We may agree with certain individuals that seem benign on the surface, but have malicious, controlling intentions. And so, as we agree to ideas, regardless of our not realizing the nature of them, we will still experience their effects, as per simulator design. And a consciousness is an overall package of ideas, and to accept an individual, to accept a consciousness package of ideas into our experience, is us agreeing with all the ideas that make up that consciousness, and what we agree to, what we decide, idea-wise, we experience. If you agree then with a controller, if you permit them into your experience, you are the effects of all the ideas that make up that consciousness, and a controlling consciousness is then the potentiality for experiencing being controlled, as we take on that consciousness and its controlling idea construction, as we agree to that individual, as we decide to experience being controlled therefore, and as lifetimes of such agreements trawled by the overall controllers go by, as these idea agreements become subconscious, even as we are unconscious of them, they still affect their nature, they still affect experience of always being in controlled circumstances, with the potentiality always of attack, torture, and death. For we have agreed to such control, and so will experience what we have placed as idea to effect simulation in our consciousness. And although the process of facing the self is a detaching from the ideas of the consciousness, which would include those of agreement ideas to the controllers, it is a process that takes the time it will for each individual, and until complete, always there will be something in the consciousness, some idea the controllers can utilize to feature in the effects of our simulation, with the consciousness overall being infused with agreements to the controllers as it is. And so, as long as we're in the simulators, we are open to attacks through the various ideas of control we still are working through. And even if we do complete our awareness, if we are detached from agreement utterly with the consciousness, as all consciousness affects the overall simulator, as it is then an overall shared arena, the dark forces can still enter our experiences and will do as they do, inclined to attack, intimidate, etc., but absent of agreements that allow their ability to harm us, agreements to their control, they will be unable to impact us adversely despite their best efforts. For our simulation is exactly as we decide it. We program our game, and yes, we still are in the simulation, so the agreements are there with the overall consciousness, with all other individuals, as to the overall game arena, but we have released all the specific ideas, the effect-generating ideas within it, that the bulk of which, through the consciousness, would have been to agreements of being controlled by the dark forces. And so attack they might, for if you have a monster in your presence, it will act monstrously, but as we haven't decided to be harmed by it, we will have everything we need to ensure this can't be so, as though we had the most powerful game character that just can't be defeated. And even if we do have agreements yet to be released that dictate our defeat, we always can withdraw into the real awareness nowness position on the real side, removing ourselves from the simulation we are experiencing, a kind of get-out-of-dodge card to play. But whatever had allowed the attack, whatever agreement is still there, and will need to be addressed sooner or later, as an agreement clung to, always potentially will have its effect that at any moment we can experience, and sometimes on occasion, even though we may not have agreements to be attacked, even though we can remove ourselves to the real awareness, nowness, safety position. Sometimes we go through the experience anyway, if it makes sense to do so for our awareness process. For many times we can become far more aware through adversity than we can if everything is rather easy and unchallenging. Confrontation always can stimulate our awareness juices, and so we may well find ourselves in attack situations, and even those where we are seemingly defeated and harmed in them, but there may have been valuable awareness-bolstering lessons to be learned. And had we not accepted our adverse situations, if, say, we were to be kidnapped on the real side and put down our assailants, we never would have the personal self be shown what the kidnapping purpose served, where we would be taken, etc. And as we go through what we could have avoided, we can provide these experiences for others, that they are made more aware of what to look out for, etc. And so, for whatever reason, there I was, attacked by this curious, squared sliver of organic material bleeding over from the real side. I rather reached for it out of curiosity, though I had determined it to represent an ill-intended source. But then it rather slipped through my fingers, and despite this being a physical level backdrop scene, my physical body would be unmoving, as this would rather break the between state position generally. So this would be more the body of another simulated vehicle, which would be also then a bleed-over feature from the real side, just as this strange squared organic material was. The square rather latched itself onto my right eye and absorbed into my head, producing pain, sensation through the astral vehicle, and it was as though this situation facilitated my instant removal of my personal awareness from the between state to the real side, as though the square was representing a kind of a conduit or other, that on latching onto my simulated vehicle would have the awareness then shifted to a location of its, or whatever animated its, choosing, and my real awareness reading of the ill intent of the source of this square was accurate, as now I found myself in a kind of vast facility with a group of others who had equally been brought here by the same means. My impressions were that this group were general, one-dimensional, unconscious individuals, and as much as perhaps my being brought to the facility could have been averted through my real awareness, etc., these others wouldn't have such an option, disconnected from their real awareness that they were, and at the mercy of their consciousness of control agreements that had them at any moment able to be brought to this facility, or any number of real side possibilities that stem from agreements to control to the various beings and individuals that they have. And this place seemed to be designed for one purpose, for utter torment and trauma-inducing, as we all were subjected to continuous attacks and tortures from what seemed like a selection of mutated creatures. In regards to the controllers, the foundation of their agreements, the foundation of the consciousness of the simulator they have fashioned to effect the overall experience they desire, is based on fear, fear of not having enough, fear of others, fear of death, wars, competition, an embedded fear that everyone must fight and struggle for what they need, even though creation is exactly as we decide it to be. So by that token, everyone can have anything they want, without the need to impose on others, or install fear programs that help support agreement structures to their controlling positions. And the controllers are more fearful than anybody, hence their inclination to control in the first place, the fear that they will lack something, so must control everyone else to ensure they have everything. And fear, like any emotion, will keep the individual locked in the personal self. For anything you activate through the body vehicles, you are the effects of, and are removed from your nowness, real awareness position, the position where the process of awareness, of becoming aware of more than the consciousness currently is, and the only position where recognition of the is can be so. Naturally then, the controllers would seek to keep people emotionally triggered, to keep them in creation, locked into their consciousness and the constant effects of themselves, of a controlled consciousness that effects then a simulation overall the controllers desire. and any being that is fear-driven, always, if we agree with them, wherever and whenever these agreements were secured, we experience a package of fear-based consciousness ideas. And if there are additional agreements that allow the control of such a being over us also, then you have experiential situations where you can be tortured, abused, killed, etc. This facility then served this purpose, heaving with these mutated creatures, which were the architects of this whole experience, as they seemed sentient enough, and no other beings were orchestrating this situation or dictating the actions of these creatures, as were my impressions. And without going into details, the tortures we experienced at the hands or tentacles of these creatures were unimaginable in their gruesomeness, as though the worst possible things that could be done to another individual, a little like movies such as Saw, etc., except more so, as these creatures also utilized the mechanics of this facility, which served as further means of torture and abuse, and I would experience the pain of their attentions also, suggesting impact on the sensation astral body. So all in all, a rather intense experience, and with intensity comes a greater recollection, and so this is why we sometimes go through such to this extent. The experience would conclude, and like anything creational, if our intent always is with the ears, we will get through it, as the simulation is rather secondary, and just a by-product of intent placement really, as we go through what we do, to reach whatever intent we have set for ourselves, if focus is maintained with whatever the intent may be. The scene faded, and another situation would follow, not entirely dissimilar, in that my overall impression was that I was putting myself, or rather my real awareness or the guides were putting me through this, that it perhaps served for awareness purposes, and that others can learn of the sort of happenings taking place in creation throughout the dimensions of it, a kind of scouting out of all the particulars, that if I hadn't gone through, I would not have had my personal self be shown, and nothing could be shared then regarding these situations in all their forms. I have made previous real-side experience mention in regards to vampires, how they are very real. They exist on the physical and throughout the other dimensions of the simulator, generally ill-intended, a particular consciousness that has developed and been generally decided along controlling and abrasive lines, with all the other elements also decided, the blood drinking, the extreme longevity of lifespan, the ability to convert others into their own kind, their usual life positions being the lower astral, what with life positions reflecting the consciousness, so will those who are especially abrasive, destructive, and imposing find themselves in the most dismal and forbidding part of creation, the lower astral. Although it must be said, some vampires are stepping up, just as the reptilians and other previously ill-intended and controlling beings are, as every real awareness eventually, despite the body types and decisions made through the consciousness, eventually decides to recognize the isness that it is a part of. And I have had encounters with the stepping up and becoming more aware vampires on the real side as much as the other ill-intended varieties. And again here, it's as though I was going through a vampire situation to again report on my findings and to verify that most vampires are constant in their malign and ill-intended inclinations toward others, where agreements allow their imposition on the real side and indeed the physical. And it's interesting that, as I had mentioned on a previous real side experience, someone I had known as a friend in this lifetime was revealed to be a vampire, and although not necessarily one on the physical level, as the decisions we make will take the cause and effect time they will to manifest on the physical, everything we decide, our intent, is instantly reflected, as in reality everything is instantly what it is, and on the real side we will see individuals as the body forms and in the life positions that reflect their current life choices and intent. And so we may well see individuals that are human now, at least on the physical, but in reality may be vampires or reptilians now, based on their life choices, the effects of themselves taking the moments they will to be so and play out on the physical, and maybe in the next lifetime will they suddenly find themselves as a reptilian or vampire, and so this individual, who I may still harbour attachment with, hence his presence in my experience, or as I said, I extended agreement just to go through this and be shown, he had now established himself a little more prominently in the vampire hierarchical structure, and indeed it was his function to gather individuals on the real side, either those agreeable consciously or not, but even those that were not agreeable must have subconscious agreements that allowed them to be procured. So overall, there was agreement therefore that allowed him to secure the individuals and rather bring them to kind of vampire parties, where more highly placed vampires would effectively use them for their own amusement, drink their blood, and generally kill them afterwards. And all this I would determine, as I allowed myself to be one such party participant, and only for the purpose that I would see this situation, and also see the kind of individuals who were the more prominent and highly placed vampires. For again, some were human at this moment on the physical, but in reality were the effects of the decisions that had afforded them these body types, and also a number of them were well-known celebrities, actors, movie stars, etc. And as this group gathered, as I had been brought to a house by this former friend, who was now a vampire, and a procurer of individuals for these more elite vampires, I knew that one of the vampires present was in fact a real guide in disguise, as it were, as my impressions afforded me. And at a certain point, the guide would spring into action before the party began, and rather whisk me away from the situation before I could fall foul to the attentions of these vampires. So again, rather an arranged and orchestrated situation for me to experience. But instead of the previous experience, where I went through it in all its detail and intensity, to go any further in this experience wasn't necessary. And so the real awareness will and can extract the personal self from any situation, providing there are no conflicting personal self held to agreement ideas that prevent this, or as in this case, a real guide would present as the means of my rescue and extraction, so to speak. And then I rather would be flying through the skies with the real guide, over simulated real side street-like settings, as the vampires formed hunting parties to search for me. Seemed they were unused to being so denied, and were rather adamant in their want to finding an escapee from their clutches, and this would rather reveal how much of what we see on the surface is far from what it seems. As all the controllers, and all those who operate within their controlling systems, the media, Hollywood, etc., are generally and in reality far from the humans that they appear to be, a little like in that movie, They Live. And as was rather apparent, and that were my overall impressions, what I went through overall was nothing that stemmed from agreements yet to be addressed, or attachments to be released, but more just a scouting expedition through the real side, to unveil more of what this simulator really is all about, that being quite the overall distorted, controlled, and restricted situation, an overall prison yard of destruction and suffering, as it has become through a consciousness that is in agreement with such distortion. And although we may find little niches where we are momentarily seemingly safe, or we may think in our minds everything is fine, at any moment the monsters can come knocking at your door, and so far better to be aware of the simulator as being that which is overall not a safe place to be, and to position ourselves better that we are less the effect of all the distortion and evils that can occur within it, and to ultimately supersede the necessity for it into real universes of the ease, where we are beyond the struggles and sufferings of what has become a very dark and twisted simulated realm on the potential verge of implosion, due to the restriction of the consciousness that affects it.